Hey guys, this is Pastor Frazier at Canton Baptist Temple. I hope that you're doing well today. For those of you on the Bible reading schedule, you know that we are in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 10 today. And there's so many wonderful verses in this chapter. I could speak from several of those verses here today, but one of them, and I'm not going to speak from these two verses, but Matthew chapter 10, verse 30, but the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear ye not, therefore, ye are of more value than many sparrows. God the Father sees when a sparrow falls to the ground. He knows the number of hairs on our head. And so we are not to live in fear, but we are to trust Him that He's going to take care of us. Great verses for going through a worldwide pandemic right now. But that's not what I want to speak about. I want us to look at verses 2, 3, and 4. And here we have a list of the 12 disciples. Matthew chapter 10, verse 2. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these. The first, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the publican, James the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. It's interesting to study the lives and the characteristics of all of these disciples. One word that comes to my mind whenever I read this list of names is this: diversity. There is quite an eclectic and a very diverse group of men. Let's think about a few of them. For instance, you've got Simon Peter. Simon Peter was pretty much the spokesman of the 12. He was very outspoken, and whatever came to his mind usually came out of his mouth. And then he's his brother Andrew. Andrew was more of a behind-the-scenes guy. Every time you find him in the Gospels, he's bringing someone to Jesus. And then you have James and John, those two brothers. Peter and Andrew are brothers, and then James and John, they're brothers. And Jesus called them the sons of thunder because at one point they asked Jesus, why don't you just send down lightning and thunder on these enemies? Well, they must have had a temper. They were quick to react. And then you have Philip and Bartholomew. You have Thomas, who was a skeptic, always questioning. He was known as Doubting Thomas. Matthew the publican. He was a despised tax collector. And then you have James, the son of Alphaeus, and also Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite. He was a zealot. He was very nationalistic. Boy, you get him talking about politics, and he probably could go on. And then you had Judas Iscariot, who was the one who ultimately betrayed the Lord Jesus Christ. Several thoughts come to my mind about this diverse group of 12 men. Number one, they were certainly not perfect. They argued about who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom. They were rebuked on several occasions for their lack of faith. Jesus said, "O ye of little faith." There were days when they didn't trust the Lord the way that they should. They didn't always understand what Jesus was trying to teach. Sometimes Jesus had to go back and explain the parable that he was teaching to them. And yet the Lord had a plan. He had a purpose for each one of them. It's interesting that Jesus saw the potential in them. When you get to the book of Acts, chapter 4, verse 13, the magistrates there, the religious leaders, they took note of these men and said, you know what? They're unlearned and ignorant men. That was the way the world perceived the 12, and yet Jesus saw potential in each one. You know, I read this list and I say to myself, there's hope for you and me. We're not perfect. We've got our weaknesses, our shortcomings, just like the disciples did. But you know what? God still has a plan, and He has a purpose for our lives. There's potential that the Lord sees in us, and He will develop that potential as we submit ourselves to Him and we allow Him to be Lord of our lives. And so a neat study of the 12 disciples. And what an encouragement it ought to be to us as we see this diverse and eclectic group of men that the Lord Jesus used in His earthly ministry. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you'll join us again tomorrow. As always, hit that share button and allow this devotional to be a blessing to somebody else. God bless.